everybody. I am super excited to share this interview with you. Today, we are talking with Dr. Heifetz from the Mindful Kids Psychology and Wellness Center in Vaughan, which is in the York region. Hello, Dr. Heifetz.
Hi, thanks for having me, Erin.
So exciting. Um, I love that we have connected and are supporting each other. So, the Guided Autism Program provides early intervention, navigation of services, and support for families who are new to autism. And your center, tell us what your center does.
Well, we do a little bit of everything, but one of our niche is to provide support for autistic individuals as well. So we see primarily children and teens and their families, and we do a lot of assessments. So sometimes, families aren't sure, maybe there's developmental concerns. So we do see kids to do developmental assessments where we might diagnose autism. And we also provide some supports and treatments as well for social supports, as well as, anxiety and other mental health concerns.
Amazing. And I'm Erin Porter from the Guided Autism Program. I'm a family autism coach. I have a private Facebook group called Launching Life with Autism. And inside that group, we have collected questions for a psychologist. And Dr. Heifetz is our psychologist. So let's start with question number one. This one came to us from Sandra. She says that she used to care for her grandson who started SK last week. He's not yet had an assessment. And as a grandparent, she feels like her hands are tied in helping him with his struggles without the parents, and without feeling like she's stepping on toes. So, how do you deal with this helpless emotion that Sandra is asking about?
Oh goodness. Yeah, no, that's a hard place to be, right? Because I think legally, from a legal standpoint, we know that parents are the ones who can consent to any assessment done, to provide those supports. But on a practical level, I always say do what's within your control, right? So if the grandparents can learn some strategies from someone like you, Erin, right? Like you work on those behavioral strategies and supports, right? Getting some ideas around, what can they do that's within their control when they see that child, right? Would be probably the first step. And then one other thing that not knowing what the parents are like, but sometimes it's about some psychoeducation, some awareness of why it might be important to pursue an assessment, for example, to help understand the parents, the child better, so that some of those challenging behaviors can be supported. Yeah.
That's so great. And you're right. This is such a hard place to be when you're not the consenting parent, but you feel like something is wrong or something is missing. Um, I've coached grandparents. I've coached grandparents and parents as a team, but I've also coached grandparents on just some of the things that they can do when they're with their grandson, just as grandparents to make communication easier. Certain books that they could read, certain routines that they could put in place, just as grandparents. Which has been helpful and lovely, but it's definitely a difficult place to be. Can you talk for a sec about assessments? Sandra mentioned that her grandson has not had his assessment. I think people are looking at waiting for those if they get referrals, right?
Yeah, so there's different routes, and I don't know if families are always aware of all the different routes, right? So there are publicly funded programs that will provide those assessments, but unfortunately, and the bright side is it's publicly funded. There's no need to pay extra, but unfortunately, there are long wait lists for those, right? So they vary depending on the area that you live in. Might be, on the 6-month wait list, you might be on a year or more wait list, right? So it does vary depending on the timing and the location. I work at my clinic is private. So what that means is that if you come to me for an assessment, I can probably see you within a month or two. Like we could see you pretty quickly. But it is a fee per service sort of model. Now, as a psychologist, there's a lot of insurance companies that will fund psychological services, but that's kind of that other option if you don't want to be on the wait list for a long time. And the assessment will involve, just to kind of give you a little bit of a glimpse on what we do for an assessment. We start with a clinical interview with the parents or caregivers, right? Just to kind of get a little bit more history and developmental information about the child. And then we meet with the child and we do a thorough assessment. We use a tool called the ADOS, the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, which is considered generally a gold standard in terms of kind of understanding autism, because it's an interactive way to assess a child, to understand how they are socially, what their reciprocal interactions are like, if there's any repetitive behaviors, basically a glance shot at all of those pieces. And then, for slightly older children, we do some cognitive assessment as well to see where they're at, right? To help us understand their abilities as well. And that
That's
helps us
amazing.
in the long run to help support them at the school level, at home, and in the community.
Yeah. And I have lots of clients who come to me who do not yet have a diagnosis. So I can support with that conversation that has to happen with you, so that all
Yeah.
of their concerns can be expressed and they can feel heard. I love this partnership. Um, okay, I have a question from Sarah and Marlene. It was sort of the same question, so I've combined a few. Um,
Mhm.
Sarah and Marlene want to know about sleep. They want to know about, well, two things. Is there any testing or research that can be done on sleep? And do you have any information on how to get sleep regulated? It's a two-part from two different people, which also goes with the question about talking about research into autism, and having autistic people participating in studies. So sleep and research and sleep in regulating that. Do you have any insight into that, into either of those?
Yeah, no, and I have to say that's a really great question, really big question. In terms of the research side of things, I do have a few research articles and links I can share in some resources. So I will kind of share that with you, Erin, and we can post them on the Facebook group for people to have some resources around that. I know that there is kind of a push towards more research on understanding autism and sleep, because it is an issue for a lot of autistic individuals, right?
It is.
We know that, some of the recent research, even on gender differences, has shown that girls with autism tend to have more sleep issues, right, than the boys, right? So there's a little bit of a gender disparity there, just for us to be aware of as well. Just in terms of interventions that have been shown to be effective, we know behavioral kind of interventions like structure around bedtime, maybe there's sensory supports, right? Things like that that might be helpful. And I know that, Erin, sometimes you work on that piece as well around what can we do to, again, it's very individual, right? Depending on where the issues are around sleep. Is it that, maybe the room is too bright? Maybe there's noises around, right? Maybe they need the white noise, right, in the background, right? So it's sometimes it's a hit or miss, right? Like you kind of like try different ways. We know that sometimes just melatonin itself, right? So you could give supplements that kind of help regulate some of that sleep cycle, right? And then, yeah, so, just keeping that in mind, and then just parent education and coaching around what could be helpful for the child. So behavioral intervention, parent coaching, understanding kind of the idea of sleep and the idea that routines can be really, really helpful around sleep, creating that calming space around sleep, right? All of those pieces can make a difference. Unfortunately, there's no magical solution, but those are the things that research has found to be helpful.
Yeah, you're so right. It's so individual, and each family's struggle is so unique. Um, I supported one family that wanted to get rid of the bottle because every time the child woke up, the child needed a bottle to go back to sleep. So we were successful in getting rid of the bottle, which was also helpful with other things, right? But
Yeah.
it's so connected, and it really takes a you really have to look at the whole family to solve one particular issue.
Yes, yes, and I have to say, it is so important to do like a thorough assessment around that, right? Like, where is this coming from? What are the issues around sleep? What might be behind it? A lot of autistic individuals that I've worked with have had some sensory needs, right, that needed to be met for them to be able to be soothed enough to sleep well, right? So even having like a weighted blanket or something like that can be really, really important. So part of, my vision for our clinic is also we have this occupational therapist that works with us that provides those sensory supports as well, right? So she does that assessment piece and helps us kind of develop those plans. And I think that's an important piece, right? Because when we think about sleep, there's just so many variables, right? So we need to narrow down what might be most helpful.
Yeah, and that is a great segue into the next question from Sylvie and Judy. They both asked about behavior. So the question is, how can we stop or discourage self-injurious behavior, screaming, shrieking, and aggression towards others? Um, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, yeah, no, that's those are questions I get often as well, and I know you do as well, Erin, right?
Yeah,
And it's so important again, right? Coming back to where is it coming from, right? What are they seeking out? What are the functions of that behavior, right? So is it maybe the sensory overload? Maybe it's attention seeking. Maybe it's escape, right? Like every time I yell, I get to kind of leave the classroom. I don't have to be there, right? That's an escape, purpose there, right? So it's really around, trying to assess and analyze what are some of those antecedents or triggers before that behavior occurs. And that takes time to collect data, right? So we do
yeah,
a lot of data collection, as you know, Erin, and maybe you can speak more to that because I know you work with families on that to understand that piece.
yeah. I've supported a lot of families um, with behavior issues. Part of the questions here, I think it was Judy, who said that it seems like the screaming and shrieking usually comes out of the blue. But one of the things that we learn when we actually dig down deep is that it's not out of the blue. And even though we react like it's out of the blue, something has happened, right? There's some perception of something, or maybe it's not even a perception, maybe something is actually happening, but there is something that is happening before the reaction. And drilling down into that is what needs to be done to support a change in behavior. So,
Agreed.
yeah. Okay, I've got another one. This one comes from Sean, who who is someone that I'm working with. So exciting. I love working with his family. His question is it possible for developmental age to increase?
Yeah, that's a
That's
great question.
that's a
Yeah.
that's a lot in that question.
So, as a psychologist, we always look at, when I do these assessments, I mentioned cognitive assessment, right? And we look at what are their abilities like. Now, that doesn't mean that they will always stay like this, right? We know that our brains are actually plastic. They're changing all throughout our lives based on our experiences. Our experiences really shape our brain, right? And so this is why early intervention is so key, right? This is why intervention in general can be so key, right? Because having ways to challenge the way that we think, right, builds a new neural pathway for us, right? So that we're able to learn new things and able to open our mind in ways that maybe we haven't done before, right? So that it creates that growth for us. It creates a different way of thinking about things. So I know it's a long, long answer, but the short of the long is I think there's definitely ability to grow. There's always going to be some challenges. So we have to be realistic in terms of, there's going to be, maybe certain challenges for this individual, but that doesn't mean that they can't, develop and strengthen. And I always kind of build from that strength perspective as well, right? What are their strengths? How do we build on that?
That's what I do. A strengths-based approach.
Yeah.
Everybody can learn. And
Yeah,
if
I knew we connected.
everybody can learn, and if we can figure
Yeah.
out where the child is at, where the parents are at, and what the goals are for the family, we can move everybody forward. I love
Yes.
that. So the last question, and you just touched on it right now briefly, but the last question is, why is early intervention so important? And I just wanted to add a little thing to the end of that, because there are so many families that are waiting for funding and for early interventions who miss that opportunity for early intervention. So I want to know from these families, why is it so important that they get some support early?
Yeah. And I like to think of it as a two-prong approach, right? There is the child, right? And obviously we want to focus on, like I said before, helping shape their brain based on their strength, building new neural pathways, new abilities. Now we know there's a sensitive period for language development, for example, right? So that's a key intervention that's really, really important as early as possible, right? So if there are language delays, we want to get on that the sooner the better. And just communication in general, right? Because communication in general not only helps the frustrated child, but it also helps, that's the other part, the parents, the family, the caregivers, everybody around them, right? Because how frustrating is it to have all these like desires and thoughts and wants and then not be able to express that, right? So, there are some really great apps that have been developed recently, and I can definitely send some names, right? Where they can, use them to communicate if they don't have the verbal language yet, right? But I think that's an important piece, and that's where a lot of the intervention goes, is to develop those skills, right? Because that's going to help reduce some of the behavioral concerns,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Because the moment they connect and communicate, that reduces that frustration, right? And that also reduces, we know that caregivers, especially who have autistic children, are more stressed than other caregivers, right? So reducing that stress so that these caregivers can have that feel of a little bit more balance, right? And take care of their mental health as well, and sort of build these connections with their children and healthy attachments, right? That is so, so important.
Yeah, it's the communication piece is so big, right? Just being able to help your child communicate their wants and needs instead of being
Yeah.
aggressive or the shrieking, um, that is huge. Yeah.
And one other thing I wanted to add to that, and this is more of a long-term trajectory, because I have seen quite a few actually teens that I've assessed recently with autism, where they've developed severe mental health issues because they never got that assessment earlier on, and they just felt so out of place, right? And it's just so key to be able to recognize some of the symptomatology, and the earlier the better, because then we can help strengthen, their, build on their resilience, build on their strength, and help them make connections and build healthy relationships, because it could go the other way if they don't get that support, right? Where they don't feel understood, and then they might develop depression, severe anxiety, right? There's a lot of kiddos that develop that social anxiety piece because they just don't know how to interact or how to fit into that, whatever the typical kind of social interactions might look like for them. Yeah.
So getting that assessment early so that you know
Yeah.
what the diagnosis is, even if it's not autism, to know what the diagnosis
Yes.
is so that you can put the right interventions in place to support communication and behavior and
Yeah, to
relationships.
support them where they're at, right? So
Yes.
it's never about, we're going to force these things on you. It's more about what are the things that need supporting, right? What are the things we can build on to help them, right? Be at their optimal and be at their best.
Yeah. Support them where they're at from a strengths-based approach. I love
Yeah.
that we're on the same page. I love it. Thank you so much for talking today. This is Dr.
Welcome.
Heifetz from Mindful Kids Psychology and Wellness Center in Vaughan, which is in the York region. And I am Erin Porter from the Guided Autism Program, and I am a family autism coach. And we have connected and are here to help you. Join that Facebook group, Launching Life with Autism. Dr. Heifetz and I are both in that group. We'll see you there. Bye, Dr. Heifetz.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Bye. Thank you.